All right, the webinar is live and we have the audience slowly coming into the room. So I'm going to just wait for maybe 1 minute so that everyone can enter. Okay, looks like people are all in the room now, and I'm happy to begin the webinar. And I just want to say good afternoon, or perhaps good morning, maybe even good evening to everyone joining us today, depending on where you are, as we meet virtually for this webinar. Welcome to our webinar, Tackling Online Gender-Based Violence Through EU Laws and Policies. And we have a formidable lineup of speakers with us today. They are experts and activists in the legal, technological, and women's rights domains who will discuss this issue from their respective sets of expertise. My name is Noor Hidayah Hassan, and I'm from White Plus. Now, White Plus is a European network of associations and activists that fights for women's rights as part of a larger struggle for social justice, sustainable livelihoods, and human rights. We advocate for changing European policies that affect people in and outside of Europe, as we understand Europe to be larger than the EU. White Plus aims to promote collective feminist movement building in Europe in solidarity with our siblings elsewhere. This webinar is organized through the Migration and Gender Working Group of White Plus. White Plus also organized this webinar with our member, Creación Positiva, to amplify this much needed conversation around cyber violence and the need to have safer digital spaces for women and girls, especially for migrant and refugee women, women of color, and minoritized women who are disproportionately impacted by gender-based violence. I would like to now introduce our moderator, Montse Pineda Lorenzo. She is the Advocacy Coordinator of Creación Positiva, an NGO based in Barcelona working from a gender and intersectional feminist perspective in order to give effect to sexual rights. Montse has over 25 years of extensive experience in advocacy on gender-based violence, sexual violence, discrimination, sexual and reproductive rights, and HIV people's rights. I would like to now give the floor over to you, Montse, to start the discussion. But actually, before I do that, let me just quickly give a quick reminder to the audience in the room that if they want to listen to the different languages that we have today, English and Spanish, they can simply click on the button at the bottom of the panel to pick the language that they wish to listen to for this webinar. And now I can properly give the floor back to you, Montse, to start the discussion. Thank you very much and have a great webinar. Thank you.
Gracias, Hidayah. Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, es un lujo y es un placer y es un orgullo de poder compartir este seminario, este webinar con todas vosotras, con todos vosotros, con todes vosotras. Bueno, antes de empezar, como ha dicho la compañera, os recuerdo que para tener acceso a la interpretación tenéis un botón que podéis apretar y tenéis la traducción en español y en inglés. Bona tarda, si em permeteu fer una salutació en català, en el meu idioma, i perquè crec que és important, com a organització catalana que som, poder donar la benvinguda també en català. Gracias. Bueno, seguimos con lo que ha comentado la compañera, la posibilidad de hacer las preguntas. Las asistentes tienen que usar la casilla que podéis ver, que pone Q&A, en el que la podéis hacer en vuestro idioma, que os resulte más cómodo. preferiblemente en inglés y en español, para que podamos luego comentarla a las panelistas. Recordaros que vamos a hacer una grabación y que estamos en streaming. Este webinario se puede ver también a través de Facebook Live y será grabado y se colgará más adelante también para que pueda ser accesible. Recordaros que si alguien quiere aparecer de forma anónima en los comentarios o en las preguntas, tiene que poner anónimo, anónima, y así se mantiene su anonimato. Recordaros que como código de conducta, este es un webinar de intercambio e interconexión feminista, y como organizadoras nos reservamos el derecho, si se diera el caso, de expulsar a aquellas personas que usen un lenguaje ofensivo o discriminatorio, o que hagan uso de este espacio de manera antidemocrática, violenta o antifeminista. Sin ninguna duda, este es un espacio donde queremos compartir y donde no cabe otra cuestión que poder establecer un diálogo desde el conocimiento, y sobre todo desde el conocimiento de nuestras compañeras panelistas expertas, ¿no? La idea de este webinar, que tanto para Web Plus como para Creación Positiva es muy relevante, y espero que sea relevante para ustedes, está contextualizado en el informe del 2018 elaborado por la Comisión de Derechos de la Mujer e Igualdad de Género del Parlamento Europeo, en el que 1 de cada 10 mujeres a partir de los 15 años ha experimentado algún tipo de ciberviolencia o de violencia digital. Recordarles que cabe destacar que las mujeres y niñas migrantes son más vulnerables a la violencia en línea, en particular al odio en línea, que tiene una naturaleza racista y xenófoba, ¿no? Esto es muy grave en el contexto, además, fundamentalista de muchos de nuestros países, de nuestros estados, que la xenofobia y el racismo es un eje de fundamentalismo, ¿no? Durante esta pandemia del COVID-19 ha habido una mayor dependencia a las herramientas informáticas para conectarse socialmente y profesionalmente, y hemos podido apreciar un aumento significativo de la violencia. Por tanto, tenemos que preguntarnos y preguntar a los gobiernos, a la sociedad civil y a las empresas tecnológicas cómo van a responder a estas cuestiones mientras estos impactos generalizados, en especial a las mujeres y a las mujeres migradas y racializadas, ¿no? Como esta violencia en línea, ¿no? Necesitamos esas herramientas que seguramente hoy vamos a poder hablar para dar respuesta más integral, más global y más efectiva, ¿no? El objetivo del webinar es compartir cuáles son los planes actuales en relación a las leyes y políticas de la Unión Europea, en general para el abordaje de las violencias de género en línea. También es compartir, identificar y debatir las diferentes formas de violencia contra las mujeres y las niñas en línea, su contexto y cómo las políticas públicas lo están abordando, ¿no? Tanto a nivel europeo como a nivel de estados, ¿no? También queremos compartir como feministas y poder debatir, ¿no?, la experiencia, las prácticas y los roles y las responsabilidades de las diferentes instituciones, ¿no?, y también los diferentes actores para poder abordar la violencia en línea, la violencia digital. Y por último, damos mucha relevancia a proporcionar recomendaciones concretas, o esperemos llegar a recomendaciones concretas que luego nos puedan servir tanto a la Unión Europea como a los diferentes países, y también a las activistas que estamos trabajando para cambios legislativos y sobre todo políticos y sociales. En ese sentido, la experiencia de Cataluña y del Estado español en abordar las violencias de género y en concreto las violencias digitales puede ser una brecha para precisamente poner en valor cómo a nivel legislativo podemos trabajar, y queremos compartirlas también con ustedes. Tengo la suerte y el privilegio de poder compartir este panel con las diferentes ponentes que les voy a presentar. Tenemos la posibilidad de compartir el espacio con la eurodiputada Sylwia Spurek, que habla desde Bélgica, y es de Polonia. Muchísimas gracias por su presencia, y seguro que vamos a poder tejer esas alianzas y vamos a poder dar a conocer su excelente trabajo. Gracias. Podemos contar con la jurista Laia Serra Perelló, de Dones Juristas y otras organizaciones y otras iniciativas que ella ha estado liderando. Después podremos compartir con ella desde Cataluña su experiencia. Muchísimas gracias, Laia, por tu presencia en el panel. También vamos a contar con Spiderelex, de la organización Donastec, también desde Cataluña. Muchas gracias también por estar presente y por compartir el activismo y mucho más allá del activismo que ustedes están realizando con todas las investigaciones. Luego vamos a hablar en detalle, ¿no? Lujo también es poder compartir con Seyi Alkiwowo, perdona, desde Reino Unido, que va a hablar no solamente en primera persona, sino en primera persona políticamente muy relevante todo lo que nos va a poder compartir. Muchas gracias, Seyi. Y Yalana, tu nombre es difícil para mí, disculpa, de la organización Antina desde Serbia. Después voy a decir bien tu apellido, disculpa. En el que también va a poder hablar de la experiencia y de la incidencia política que están haciendo. Ella nos va a explicar después una iniciativa que seguramente todas nosotras vamos a poder aprender y que vamos a poder incluso replicar en nuestras organizaciones. Tenemos muy poquito tiempo y no quiero coger más tiempo de lo necesario. Recordaros que vamos a tener un espacio de preguntas y respuestas. Excepcionalmente vamos a darle, después de su intervención, a la eurodiputada y también a Seyi la oportunidad de responder preguntas, porque desgraciadamente van a tener que marcharse antes de que acaben y no queremos perder la oportunidad de escucharlas. Sin más dilación, quiero darle la palabra a la doctora Sylwia Spurek. Decirles a ustedes que es una eurodiputada, que es abogada con doctorado en Derecho y asesora legal y legisladora y feminista, que actualmente es la vicepresidenta de la Comisión de Derechos de las Mujeres e Igualdad de Género y es miembro de la Comisión de Libertades Civiles y Justicia y Asuntos de Interior del Parlamento Europeo, ¿no? Hay muchísimas cosas destacables también de su bibliografía y yo simplemente quiero resaltar un elemento importante, sobre todo por la situación que está viviendo en estos momentos Polonia, ¿no? Que ella ha sido autora de la primera ley de gobierno de Polonia sobre la prevención de la violencia doméstica, con lo cual también agradecerle todo el trabajo que ha hecho y que sigue haciendo desde su país. Muchísimas gracias, le paso la palabra y si usted nos puede hacer un marco legal, ¿no? Una descripción general sobre cuál es el marco legal de la Unión Europea para abordar las ciberviolencias y si puede señalar algunas de las lagunas que conocemos y que seguramente usted nos puede explicar mejor que nadie. Muchas gracias, Silvia. Le doy la palabra.
Thank you very much, and first of all, thank you for inviting me to talk to you about cyber violence. And first of all, I would like to say that gender-based cyber violence, which we are discussing here today, is just a new phase of a well-known phenomenon, violence against women and girls. And gendered dimension of cyber violence should influence how we perceive it and how we take action against it, including when drafting laws and policies. Gender-based violence is a widespread violation of fundamental human and women's rights and the most severe form of gender-based discrimination, because violence against women as such is the most drastic form of gender-based discrimination. And it is the same mechanism as in domestic violence, sexual violence, and any other violence against women. The root causes of all types of gender-based violence are the same, and we all know it. And this is why we need laws and policies which address them holistically. It is important to acknowledge that as the European Union, as the societies, we have failed so far in preventing and combating gender-based violence. In the 21st century, women and girls experience violence every day. We do not feel safe at our homes, do not feel safe when going out on the streets, do not feel safe in public places, and do not feel safe even online. And I experience cyber violence myself while acting against and fighting violence against women, actually, which could be funny, but obviously it isn't. And the problem is that we don't have legal definition of gender-based cyber violence, and I'm saying this as a lawyer. This is a problem, neither at the EU level nor at the international level. There are some definitions, like definition of gender-based violence in the Istanbul Convention, very useful, very complex. There are definitions of cybercrime in the Budapest Convention on cybercrime, but none of these legal acts so far have captured both dimensions of this specific type of violence, gendered online. This is very obvious what I'm saying, but cyber violence can take many different forms. Hate speech, cyber harassment, cyber stalking, trafficking and sexual exploitation, sharing content without consent, hacking, identity theft, cyberbullying. And it can be perpetrated via different channels like social media, like comment section, and we all use this channel. So we are at risk of cyber violence against women. And there are also different perpetrators. There are relatives, current partners, ex-partners, but also anonymous users. Creating a good definition could be difficult, but it's not impossible. And we are working on it at the EU level. And harmonization is really needed. Now there is a wide range of approaches to dealing with gender-based violence in member states. Mostly these approaches, this mechanisms are insufficient. And in the majority of member states, legislation does not provide provisions which would make specific reference to cyber or gender dimension. And the problem is clearly transnational, as cyber violence is not limited by borders and should be considered as serious crime as any type of violence against women. These are the grounds, a good basis for the legal intervention of the EU, which should also finally provide a common legal definition of gender-based cyber violence. What is more, there is no specific instrument at the EU level directly addressing neither gender-based cyber violence nor gender-based violence as such. The gaps are as following. Article 83 of the treaty, which is actually a list of EU recognized crime, does not include gender-based violence, and it should be amended as simple as such. And both gender and cyber perspectives must be acknowledged. And we also need EU to ratify Istanbul Convention, which is insofar the most comprehensive international treaty forming a legal framework to protect women and girls from all forms of violence and to prevent, prosecute and eliminate violence against them. I call Istanbul Convention a constitution of victims, women victims of violence, of gender-based violence. And as you probably know, the monitoring body of Istanbul Convention highlighted, and I quote, online violence against women and girls should be seen as a continuum of offline violence and as a means to maintain women in an inferior position in the digital sphere and in real life. So ratification of the Istanbul Convention by the EU would undoubtedly improve prevention and protection measures, also with regards to gender-based cyber violence. Of course, we can refer to some EU directives, mostly the Victims' Rights Directive. And the directive sets out the fundamental standards for the rights, protection and support structures available to victims of crimes. It could be applicable to victims of gender-based cyber violence, but only if member states criminalizes gender-based cyber violence of its or its types. Of course, we have the directive on preventing and combating trafficking in human beings and protecting its victims, the General Data Protection Regulation, the Digital Service Act, and in general, it will be relevant for cyber violence and it will impose stricter content liability on social media platforms, which is crucial. Because we need social media platforms to take a leading role, to take their responsibility for the content. There are a lot of questions and problems identified, for sure. For example, the differences between member states in defining what kind of content is illegal now. This is how we are coming back to the need of a common legal definition, the need of harmonization and of a holistic legal act specific to both online environment and gender dimension of gender-based cyber violence. And we need to take into account existing challenges, existing gaps, underreporting, limited public and law enforcement awareness or understanding of the phenomenon, insufficient victim support services, limited research, knowledge, data, investigative challenges, including working cross-border. What we are doing now in the European Parliament is the preparation of combating gender-based violence, cyber violence dossier. As you know, European Parliament does not have a direct legislative initiative, but can make a legislative request to the European Commission to submit a legislative proposal. So this is like an indirect initiative, right? That it does not create an obligation on the Commission to propose the legislation requested, but the Commission must provide reasons for any refusal to follow a parliamentary initiative. There are two committees responsible, LIBE and FAM committee, They are jointly preparing this report, and I am one of the co-rapporteurs of this report. I am co-responsible for leading the work, which is in progress, and we are currently considering and analyzing different legislative options and approaches. And our goal is to develop a proposal which would fill in all the existing gaps and strongly address the gender dimension of cyber violence. This is why the work on this report is closely linked to a campaign of gender-based violence, which will be organized by my group, the Greens. And the aim of the campaign is to influence the adoption of comprehensive directive on preventing and combating gender-based violence in all its forms. And for this, for sure, we need Article 83 of the treaty to be amended. So it would include gender-based violence on the list of EU recognized crimes and be a base, a legal ground for this directive. We are assessing now which one of the different available options would be the most relevant. And this is the stage of the work on this dossier. As I have mentioned before, one of the biggest challenges resulting from the current legal gaps is lack of public awareness of the problem of gender-based cyber violence, including among the victims themselves and, which is crucial, among law enforcement authorities. And this is definitely an area where civil society organizations can contribute. Civil society organizations, NGOs, are not the ones responsible for this, because member states, governments, authorities are responsible for fighting gender-based violence, but NGOs can contribute, can support these efforts. And there is a need of awareness-raising campaigns for general public education, specific education for law enforcement institutions and private sector, obviously, including social media platforms. And to conclude with, gender-based violence is a continuum of offline gender-based violence happening in online environment. Its root causes are the same, and I've been dealing with gender-based violence, with violence against women for 21 years now. And I can see the same gaps, the same problems, the same challenges. I was at the beginning a lawyer in NGO, then I was drafting legal acts for government in this regard. And as you mentioned, the first draft of the law on counteracting domestic violence in 2003. I was coordinating the process of ratification of Istanbul Convention by Poland. And then I was a Deputy Commissioner for Human Rights. Cyber violence has the same origin, the same root causes as domestic violence, as sexual violence, as trafficking in women. And it is a growing phenomenon and can take many different forms. And due to this complex nature, currently there is no legal definition, but also it is a result of the lack of political will. When we look at the efforts of fighting violence against women, we can see that we could be in a different place, in a different moment in a history, with political will to change it, to fight violence against women. And this is 21st century, and we are still not safe, offline and online. And I can assure you that I will use all my knowledge and expertise to work efficiently on this initiative legislative report. And of course, meanwhile, there are also other non-legislative initiatives which could improve the situation within the existing legal framework and which can be supported by civil society. This includes, of course, awareness raising, research, and support for victims, which NGOs do. Where NGOs do a great job, and I can see it in Poland, I can see it worldwide, and I think we need really a common understanding. Cyber violence against women needs to be eliminated. And we need to do everything we can to fight it, to prevent it, to make the platforms, social media platforms, to be responsible for the content they publish, actually. And this is a huge role of law, to make them be responsible. So I'm at your disposal in terms of questions. Thank you again for inviting me here. And I'm really looking forward for the next presentations. I will stay as long as I can, so at least 1 hour. And thank you again, and avanti.
Muchas gracias, Silvia. Tenemos 5 minutitos solo de preguntas. Muchas gracias por su intervención y por poner luz, ¿no?, a las oportunidades también que nos brinda la Unión Europea, no solamente las dificultades, ¿no?, con esta necesidad de modificar el artículo 83 del tratado, que es muy claro, ¿no?, que usted ha insistido mucho, y en la necesidad también de poner no solo en la sanción en el foco, sino también en la prevención. Es muy importante, ¿no? Gracias. Ha habido una primera pregunta que le han comentado, ¿no?, que es cómo se pueden poner con usted en contacto, ¿no?, o qué medios de contacto tienen la posibilidad. Pues porque hay algunas compañeras que tienen investigaciones y quieren compartirla con usted. No sé si usted puede dar alguna referencia para que se pongan en contacto con usted. Y en ese sentido, ¿no?, ¿cómo puede la segunda pregunta es cómo puede la Directiva Europea definir la ciberviolencia de género y cómo pueden ser tratados a los perpetradores de la ciberviolencia? Son preguntas que seguramente empezaríamos a un nuevo, una nueva ponencia casi de usted, ¿no?, porque son complejas. Si puede ser limitada en su exposición, se lo agradecería. Gracias.
Yes, thank you very much. And as I said, we are now working on certain elements of the law that should be adopted and implemented, and we need to include all kinds of behaviors that could be cyber violence, that constitute cyber violence, and we should add this gender dimension to this definition. But for now, I cannot say specifically how the definition looks like, because there is no definition right now. And in terms of, shortly speaking, perpetrators, of course, probably everybody thinks about criminal charges and criminal sanctions. It could not be just criminal sanctions. First of all, if we can agree that cyber violence against women has the same root causes as violence against women as such, we need to work with perpetrators. For example, the same way we work with perpetrators of domestic violence against women to correct their behaviors, to teach them how to behave, because nobody is born as a perpetrator of violence. We just learn violence within the circle of our lives, at home, in schools, from colleagues, friends, and we can be tough how not to be perpetrators. So first of all, this kind of workshops are crucial for perpetrators, and at the same time we need to have these alternatives in the form of criminal charges and criminal sanctions, for sure. To use them in these cases, we need to use criminal law, but also compensation is needed in some cases. So we have various instruments to be used in such cases. And I don't think cyber violence against women should be treated differently from other behaviors of this kind. And of course, channels are different, tools are different, but sanctions, responsibilities should not. So very shortly speaking, and I'm sorry I talked too much at the beginning, shortly speaking, it looks like this, and we are at the very preparatory stage of this dossier. So I will be happy to get all your comments and suggestions, and you can contact me by my EP address, and the organizers have it, so please feel free to share my address to everyone interested.
Muchísimas gracias, Silvia. Ahora lo haremos en el chat. Comentaros que se han hecho más preguntas. Por el tema del tiempo no las vamos a poder responder. Deciros en todo caso que vamos a preparar un informe en el que vamos a poder dar algunas de las respuestas. Lo siento mucho. Algunas vamos a rescatarlo con otras panelistas porque también pueden responder más adelante, ¿no? Quiero presentarles a la compañera, que es un lujo poder contar con ella, y la experiencia que tiene de cotidiana y sobre todo también de activismo y de experiencia penalista, ¿no? Que es la señora Laia Serra Perelló, ¿no? Ella es abogada, penalista, docente, formadora y activista que trabaja en los derechos humanos, en la violencia de género, en la no discriminación, en el derecho a la protesta, a la libertad de expresión, sobre los delitos de odio y la interseccionalidad. Y recientemente ha redactado la reforma de la ley catalana contra la violencia de género, que ha sido aprobada en el Parlamento catalán en diciembre del 2020 y que ella ha profundizado, y así lo ha hecho también Cataluña, ¿no?, en la inclusión de la ciberviolencia a las leyes de violencia de género. Laia, buena tarde. Simplemente pues, explicarnos un poco tu experiencia desde la perspectiva legal sobre cómo se ha incorporado la violencia de género, ¿no?, o cómo se puede incorporar y cómo la modificación de la ley puede ser una buena práctica para el resto de países de la Unión Europea. Gracias, Laia. No, lo tienes silenciado, disculpa.
Ciertamente. ¿Se me oye ahora? ¿Sí? Estupendo. Bueno, pues muchas gracias por la oportunidad de compartir este webinar. Me parece una ocasión extraordinaria para compartir puntos de vista. Y antes de explicar la experiencia catalana, me gustaría poner encima de la mesa una serie de reflexiones. Estoy siguiendo atentamente, ¿no?, el proceso legislativo que explicaba la doctora Spurek, un proceso muy complejo y donde encontrar el marco legal, porque el marco legal va a definir efectivamente el potencial regulatorio, ¿no?, que se desprenda de esta iniciativa. Y ofrezco, evidentemente, ¿no?, compartir los conocimientos y las experiencias en este sentido. Yo, antes de entrar a dar unas pinceladas sobre el marco regulatorio, me gustaría hacer unas reflexiones previas, como decía. El primero es, antes de partir de ninguna iniciativa regulatoria, sea a nivel europeo o a nivel local, como hemos hecho, deberíamos tener una reflexión sobre qué o qué estamos pretendiendo proteger. Porque cuando regulamos sobre violencias de género, violencias machistas, sean cibernéticas o no, tenemos encima de la mesa una serie de valores, una serie de derechos, los cuales pueden ser la autonomía de las mujeres, su participación política, su bienestar personal, su reputación, su seguridad, etcétera, etcétera. Las herramientas legales que diseñemos vendrán definidas o delimitarán el efecto en la protección. Y por lo tanto, por ejemplo, aquí en el Estado español empiezan a haber algunas sentencias de casos concretos en que el Tribunal Constitucional reflexiona si los bienes jurídicos existentes hasta el momento nos sirven o tenemos que pensar en nuevos bienes jurídicos emergentes, nuevas figuras, nuevos abordajes de los derechos que sean los que inspiren esta futura legislación. Otro aspecto que me parece absolutamente importante es, conociendo la limitación de las herramientas punitivas, que las mismas no ocupen todo el espacio y vengan complementadas por elementos tan imprescindibles como es la prevención, pero también la reparación. Estamos asistiendo, por ejemplo, al Estado español en que empiezan a haber condenas sobre ciberviolencias hacia mujeres que aprecian y reconocen el delito, pero no la reparación hacia las mujeres. Y por lo tanto es algo importante tener en cuenta. Recogiendo también las consideraciones de la doctora Spurek, efectivamente cuando pone en el centro la importancia de definiciones, a mí me gustaría matizar y compararlo con la experiencia de los delitos de odio. Es decir, tenemos una decisión marco del 2008 que regula los delitos de odio a nivel de racismo y xenofobia, que no incluye LGTBI-fobia y otros aspectos. Son definiciones ciertamente amplias, pero esto no ha impedido que se dé importancia a los delitos de odio a nivel europeo en los códigos penales nacionales y en las condenas que se están aplicando. Y por lo tanto surge la duda si es una problemática de valores, una problemática de definiciones o una problemática de consenso social sobre la importancia de las violencias de género. Para dar dos últimas pinceladas y centrarme en el motivo de mi intervención, me gustaría poner encima de la mesa otra reflexión. Y la reflexión es que estamos abordando las violencias de género como una discriminación, como una vulneración de derechos humanos. Ciertamente los convenios internacionales navegan en esta dirección, pero no desde la óptica democrática ni de ciudadanía. Cuando las mujeres estamos enfrentando violencias de género, estamos dejando de participar socialmente en todas las esferas, el ámbito escolar, el ámbito local, el ámbito político, etcétera, etcétera. Y por lo tanto, una sociedad que se pretenda democrática nunca puede dejar de responder y de reparar las violencias que enfrenta una parte de la comunidad. Y esto es lo que está sucediendo. Sentadas estas como pequeñas reflexiones, perdón, una última reflexión, que vamos con los tiempos cronometrados. En los últimos tiempos he tenido la oportunidad de trabajar sobre los efectos discriminatorios de la inteligencia artificial y me parece también interesante reflexionar sobre Internet. Internet es un espacio que han ocupado las empresas con una perspectiva de lucro y no se está abordando esta concepción de este espacio como un lugar común. Si todas las herramientas legales apuntan a la infracción y al responsable de la infracción, dejamos a un lado concebir Internet como un ecosistema, como un bien común en que todos y todas somos responsables de romper las dinámicas de violencias. Como decía, termino con estas reflexiones generales a nivel de políticas públicas. Es muy grande la materia y sintetizar es complicado. Sobre el marco legal, me gustaría aprovechar para decir que tenemos el Convenio de Istambul, que ofrece una serie de oportunidades. No podemos dejar de considerar también la Recomendación 35 del 2017 del Comité de la CEDAW, que tiene alguna mención muy valuosa. Y a mí me gustaría poner de relieve que cuando hablamos de la oportunidad del Convenio de Istambul, estamos muy pendientes otra vez de la obligación de convertir en delito determinadas conductas. Pero el Convenio de Estambul tiene otras potencialidades, como es el compromiso de los Estados de modificar patrones socioculturales, como es el de ofrecer protección inmediata y también reparación, y sobre todo una a nivel conceptual que me interesa. Y es que el Convenio de Estambul empieza a romper la estructura que nos encorseta hasta ahora. Y me explico. La violencia de género solo se viene reconociendo en el marco de la pareja y de la expareja, cuando la violencia de género va mucho más allá y precisamente las ciberviolencias que afectan a muchas mujeres fuera de este marco íntimo son una oportunidad para repensar la estructura en la que hemos encasillado las violencias de género. Las nuevas legislaciones tienen que partir de esta óptica, si no reproducirán limitaciones que debemos superar. Voy ahora a aterrizar a la iniciativa catalana. Espero y tenemos mucha confianza en que el proceso europeo que explicaba la doctora Spurek pueda abrir ventanas de oportunidad y que efectivamente no tiene absolutamente ningún sentido y ninguna justificación que la violencia de género no esté dentro de los delitos que forman parte de este marco legal común. Es un objetivo absolutamente urgente e imprescindible. Y como os decía, voy a apuntar esta experiencia que hemos tenido en Cataluña, recibiendo muchas consultas de activistas de todo el Estado español. En el 2018 me decidí a hacer una especie de investigación o documento que sintetizaba las recomendaciones internacionales y los aprendizajes de las ciberactivistas. En Cataluña tenemos la suerte de contar con un colectivo referente al que pertenece Spider Alex, luego intervendrá. Y por lo tanto, ¿qué hemos estado haciendo? A partir de esta primera investigación, esto dio lugar a que diferentes profesionales y diferentes activistas entráramos en contacto y viéramos que Cataluña es un lugar de oportunidad para regular sobre estas violencias. ¿Por qué? Porque tenemos un tejido asociativo muy rico, muy proactivo. Tenemos profesionales de distintos ámbitos, ¿no? Como la psicología, el derecho, la estadística y otros ámbitos absolutamente comprometidas con las violencias. Y por lo tanto, en 2018 hicimos una queja ante el Congreso de los Diputados y Diputadas quejándonos por la desprotección del gobierno español frente a las violencias digitales, y luego aterrizamos a Cataluña, donde ha habido una sensibilidad del tejido asociativo y también ha habido una alianza con la academia, en este caso Donastet y Antígona de la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, que trabajaron en una nueva investigación. Es decir, hemos ido complementando los estudios desde el activismo y los estudios desde la academia para forjar una base sobre la cual regular. Esto ha sido importante. ¿Por qué? Porque el hecho de que activistas feministas comprometidas interviniéramos en este proceso legislativo ha permitido que la génesis, el espíritu de esta legislación no tenga solo una clave punitiva, sino que ponga en el centro los derechos de las mujeres, derechos que van mucho más allá de la seguridad y del bienestar y de la reputación, y como decía, tienen esta óptica en clave democrática. A partir de aquí se hizo la propuesta de reformar la ley de violencia de género catalana. Es una ley autonómica, pero es una ley que afecta a 7,5 millones de personas, la mitad de las cuales somos mujeres. Por lo tanto, tiene un abasto territorial significativo. Introducimos elementos muy novedosos, desde las violencias de género hacia mujeres políticas o representantes electas, las violencias institucionales que tienen que ver con la diligencia debida y por la ausencia de una respuesta adecuada, las nuevas definiciones de delitos sexuales y las violencias digitales. Esto quiere decir que en pocos meses, porque estamos asistiendo a este cambio, se aprobó la ley el 24 de diciembre y ya ahora mismo organismos como el Instituto Catalán de las Mujeres, la Diputación de Barcelona, muchas, vamos a decir, estructuras locales y regionales están formando sus profesionales en estas violencias machistas digitales. Esto va a transformar todo el circuito de atención a las violencias machistas que van a incorporar estas nuevas violencias. De ahí va a surgir la oportunidad de perfeccionar estas definiciones, de ahondar en retos como, por ejemplo, cómo definimos la valoración de riesgo en las violencias digitales. Unas valoraciones de riesgo que en las otras violencias de género llevan mucho tiempo trabajándose. Vamos a tener que repensar cuáles son los mecanismos de denuncia para facilitar el reportar estos contenidos. Y me gustaría aprovechar para hacer una última pincelada porque sé que vamos con un tiempo muy justo. En esta ley incluimos la posibilidad de crear un espacio de trabajo conjunto con las plataformas intermediarias de Internet para interpelarlas sobre su responsabilidad. Y quiero decir que esto se enmarca en un proceso internacional más amplio. Hasta ahora se ha avanzado en el marco de los derechos humanos y las empresas a entender que estas son responsables por sus políticas, por ejemplo, a nivel de extractivismo de recursos. Es hora de ir más allá y concebir el impacto de los derechos humanos por parte de las empresas en relación al impacto de sus políticas de empresa hacia los derechos de las mujeres y otras colectividades. No se están responsabilizando de atender y balancear el lucro con los deberes y el compromiso democrático. Veremos cómo funciona esta experiencia de interpelación de las plataformas intermediarias, pero es obvio que hasta ahora las moderaciones de contenidos de las grandes plataformas no han sido sensibles con esta óptica democrática de rendición de cuentas y de transparencia, ni en poner en el centro que las mujeres y otros colectivos, otras comunidades, tienen derecho también a que estas plataformas se adapten a las necesidades de nosotras como usuarias. Acabo con esta reflexión, no sé si me queda tiempo o no, pero quería asegurarme, ya me dice mucho que no, de poner los elementos más importantes y luego reservo para el turno de preguntas, ¿no?, las dudas que hayan podido surgir, y gracias de nuevo.
Muchísimas gracias, Laia, por ceñirte al tiempo y sobre todo también por ser poseedora de la claridad comunicativa, de señalar los aspectos claves, tanto de las primeras reflexiones como que creo que han sido imprescindibles para poder luego detallar, ¿no?, cómo la experiencia de redes, ¿no?, de trabajo colectivo entre academia, movimiento social, ¿no?, político y también las activistas que estáis tan presentes en el desarrollo, incluidas las juristas. Gracias por esos ejes de trabajo que después en el turno de preguntas cuando lo hablamos, porque os recuerdo que ahora vamos a seguir profundizando con la siguiente compañera y sobre todo también por recordarnos la responsabilidad de las plataformas, tanto de las intermedias como de las finales. Gracias, Laia. Luego tenemos la oportunidad de profundizar y con ganas de seguir, dada tu experiencia. Voy a pasar la palabra a la compañera Spidelarex, que es de Donastec. Ella es socióloga, doctora en Economía Social e investigadora en TICS para el bien público de Tecnología de la Información y Comunicación. Ella es la fundadora del colectivo ciberfeminista catalán Donastec. Quien no lo conozca, lo recomiendo que podáis seguirlo en redes también. Y que explora la relación entre género y tecnología, desarrollando investigación y acción, documentales y formación. Discutirá sobre las respuestas feministas de la sociedad civil en la prevención y protección mujeres y niñas contra la violencia de género en línea. Disculpar los problemas técnicos que estamos teniendo, sé que algunas de vosotras no estáis viendo a todas las ponentes. Espero que, bueno, sabéis que tenéis la posibilidad de verlo, de poner en todas las panelistas, y porque sabemos que estamos teniendo dificultades, y las que tenéis dificultades de oír bien la traducción, os recomiendo que podáis subir al máximo el volumen, porque parece ser que son problemas que no podemos solventar. Bueno, muchísimas gracias y te doy la palabra. Gracias.
Buenas. Para verificar si se me oye bien y si se ve la presentación, ¿me pueden
Todo correcto.
decir algo? Vale,
todo
perfecto.
correcto, sí, gracias.
Pues voy a hacer la ponencia en inglés. Muchas gracias. Solo decir que soy cofundadora de Donastec, lo hemos fundado con otras compañeras. So thanks everybody. Thanks for having me here. I really feel honored to share this space with the amazing other feminists in the room. I'm going to share about the characteristic of the digital space that allows for gender-based violence to occur, and I'm going to introduce later some feminist response initiatives or good practices from civil society that are trying to prevent and mitigate those gender-based violence. As it has already been said, the past years we have been significant rise in those violences oriented toward women, women journalists, public politicians, women activists, human rights defenders, but also against LGBTQ+ people and generally minorities that have been discriminated or traditionally marginalized. So what we can see is that the increased use of internet and media platforms generally mirror, complement and amplify old and new forms of violence against those groups. And as it has already been said also, online and offline gender-based violence exist in a continuum. In many cases, different violent actions and attacks do overlap, and they create a complex matrix of harm, which solutions can only be assessed in a multi-layer approach. So in relation to what makes gender-based violence in digital spaces different, I want to say that digital spaces and information communication technologies do encompass different layers, no? From the backbone of internet, technical infrastructure like data center, the devices we are using, media, online services and platforms. And we do use this for a multi-purpose, no? Not only to cover our communication, information and documentation needs, but also for networking, maintaining relationships, but also for exploring and shaping our identities. So this means basically that digital space do play a central role in now we are able to produce narratives and imaginaries. And this is pretty important because from there we will go from tropes, cultural tropes that can shape stereotypes, that can build prejudice and discrimination. So in which way can we contribute to digital space to create other possible worlds? No? What voices and visions are included? Which ones are permitted? Which ones are censored or self-censored in those digital spaces? No? And here we can see that they negatively impact women, of course. Another important dimension is the extent to which things can be shared or distributed in the digital spaces. It's possible to send abusive images or text to literally millions of people using those platforms. That means also that we need transfrontalier solutions, of course. And of course, when image of video of women being harmed are distributed online, they do re-victimize the person that has been a victim of those gender-based violence. So it's a different realm. Then there's also the possibility of another temporality. The temporality of abuse and harassment online or digital space can happen sometimes 24/7 and never stop. And this is also explained because digital spaces and internet have not been designed to forget. And it's very difficult to stop the distribution or the remove of material. It's very difficult for technical reasons and because it's very easy to copy the materials and put them in other places, but also because the business model of many of those platforms are based on traffics and clicks, and hate speech and gender-based violence can be easily monetized. So this means that we have two reasons to make it very difficult to remove materials that are harmful. Then there's another dimension that has been also named by the other presenters, is the fact that abusers can be easily anonymous. So women are also targeted online for speaking up for themselves and for challenging norms of power and power structures, and the attackers typically act in an anonymous way, making it difficult to stop, challenge them or identify them. But also they have now possibilities to unite in distributed ways and to coordinate mobs that will be harassing certain targets. So this is also a new set of challenges that need to be think and plan around. At the same time, I think that as feminists, we need to be very strong in protecting and defending privacy and anonymity. Those are very important rights for anybody that uses the internet, but also especially for women, right defenders and survivors. So it's not a solution to remove our right to privacy and anonymity to tackle gender-based violence, and we need to find solutions. Another important dimension of what makes gender-based violence in digital spaces different is also the fast pace of change. Those technologies evolve very, very quickly, and they do have a lot of negative or unexpected outcomes. And generally, legislation is always catching later. And we can see this specifically, for instance, now on the role of many technology surveillance that are being enrolled, thermal cameras or artificial intelligence, facial recognition. All those are being rolled in different European settings, and we can see that they're having like unexpected and negative outcomes for women, migrants, refugees, and other kind of groups. So we should be also taking this in account. All this means that in generally there's a strong lack of understanding how those spaces work, and this is also because we don't get to be educated in a political and feminist way to what those technologies entails, what are their pros, their cons, who owns those technologies, the data, who can and should act. So this goes together with the fact that also many gender-based violence remains under the radar or are not perceived as violence because they have been normalized. There's a lot of people that goes on internet and just normalize the gender violence they are facing or the hate speech. And this is associated to what Sylwia before, no? Like the complaints and reporting mechanism of many of the platforms are either lacking or are not designed or adapted to a feminist and intersectional perspective. The fact that many platforms are not providing reporting mechanism in multi-language, no, in translation, is a very big problem, to say only one example. And all this accumulates to the fact that so far we don't really have like public institutions taking the role of compiling official and longitudinal data about the diversity and the extent of the gender-based online violence that are happening. No? So this makes it easy to say that this is still anecdotal, even if we know that gender-based violence are pervasive and happening everywhere. Another important element that I want to underline has been explained by Eugenia Spurek in her research called Online Misogyny as Witch Hunt, in which she explains that current online misogyny, anti-feminism, and culture wars are also designed to prevent women from participating in building the forthcoming technological future. And she underlines that any resolution of the digital violence to which women are subjected is likely to necessitate radical ways of redistributing power and resource rather than mere policy change by social media corporation. And I do totally support this claim. And finally, all those differences that happens in the digital space, for sure what we need is intersectional and holistic solutions that would involve technical knowledge, legal expertise, strategic communication, psychological support, and networks of support and solidarity. So another element that I want to underline regarding these elements right now, because of the COVID-19 crisis and global pandemic, and the fact that many activities had to move online, is that unfortunately it's the patriarchal big tech companies that are getting richer with these situations. For me, for sure, one limits of legislation is reflected in the endemic inequality to access to justice. Most legal processes are out of reach for a very large part of the individuals that are affected by gender-based violence. And in relation to the role that can tech companies, yes, I think we need to make them responsible, but they have been and they will keep fueling privacy invasion, infotoxication, poor labor and employment conditions, hate speech and gender-based violence because of the people that have been designing and owning those platforms, who generally are rich, white, sociopaths, guys that don't have human rights or women's rights or environment rights in their agenda. So I do believe that big tech monopolies need to be challenged for multiple reasons. So now I'm going to speak about the important thing here is how women and the feminist networks organize themselves to tackle and mitigate and overcome those gender-based violence when the public sector or legislation or the private sector are not able to do it right now. So when I'm talking about feminist infrastructure, I'm talking about anything that sustains with more or less stable resource the advancement of feminist struggles. So I'm talking safe space, shelters, libraries, trustworthy sisterhood networks, critical digital infrastructure that is set up and maintained by feminists. So it could include servers, bots, archives, but I'm also talking about meetings, workshops, and parties that are very important to create trust and support among us. So here I'm talking about communities. Some are civil society organizations, or there are informal networks. They are based on sororidad, sisterhood networks, and support and solidarity. A very clear example, from we can take a lot of lessons, is the organization of women to provide safe information about how to get a safe abortion in one of the 170 countries that are still criminalizing the access to abortion, or that are providing information about sexuality or reproductive health. There's been like a lot of examples. So informal networks, organizations that have been developing a lot of ways of providing this support and accompaniment and counseling. And then now I'm going to talk about other examples that are specifically designed to tackle gender-based online violence. For instance, Helpdesk for supporting women facing digital emergency and harassment. This is set up by Digital Rights Foundation, which is a foundation located in Pakistan. They started 4 years ago. They provide support in a non-judgmental way, and they also collect data about the different type of gender-based violence happening. So they are acting like an observatory. And so far they have been receiving support from different organizations and to maintain their cyber harassment helpline that is working in 9/8 with a free toll number. No? So that's a very good example. Another example is the project of Helpline that is attending digital emergencies that human rights defenders and women human rights defenders are facing. And this is a helpline that is working 24/7 every day of the year. It's located in different places of the world, so they can attend in very many different languages. And it's also related to another project that is called the Digital First Aid Kit, which is a resource that is maintained by many different organizations, among which Access Now, in which activists and people can find a way of understanding what they're facing and the many ways of support. And if they cannot fix the problem by themselves, they can reach the organization that they will provide to them direct support. No? So those are very good examples. Another way of providing this kind of support is also the very big diversity of manuals, guides, and other resources that have been shaped with a feminist and intersectional perspective. This is a portal that has been set up in America Latina for sharing tips about how to report to platforms, the laws that exist, how to denounce to justice, how to control the technologies that you are using, or open a dialogue with your community in regarding to sharing non-consentful images that are harmful, and that has been adapted to 14 different countries in Latin America. And we also worked on the adaptation last year with Laia and other friends for the Spanish legislation context. So I'm not sure when my time is ending. I see 1 minute, but I don't know if I'm over. I'm almost there. So these are other examples of manual and guides and resources that can be found online, where feminists provide tips and training, but also assistance at distance to other women about how to remain the most safe possible when they're using internet and other technologies. And finally, I would like to name some projects that are there to set up feminist servers to host contents and online services by feminists for feminists, which is also like a very active panorama lately. And we should be aware of those different projects, their diversity, and what they means for our feminist struggles and how we can support them. So I'm over. I hope it worked fine.
Muchas gracias, compañera, porque también has dado claves de la perspectiva de cómo las organizaciones, de cuando nos organizamos, ¿no? Desde una lógica que tiene que ver con la autodefensa feminista, si me permites utilizar el concepto en esta clave, ¿no? Vamos a tener ahora la posibilidad de escuchar a Sei Akiwowo, que es de la organización GRITS, que ella ha estado galardonada internacionalmente. Ella es fundadora y directora ejecutiva de la organización benéfica recién formada, y la misión de la organización GIT es despertar a una generación de ciudadanas y ciudadanos digitales equipados para crear y exigir espacios en línea seguros para todo el mundo. Ella inició su trayectoria después de haber sufrido violencia en línea, que explicará porque habla en primera persona, y da claves muy relevantes y muy importantes en el trabajo también comunitario y colectivo. Sei, muchas gracias por participar y te doy la palabra. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. As mentioned, my name is Sei Akiwowo, and I am the Executive Director of Glitch. Glitch was birthed out of my lived experience of when I was a local politician back in 2014. A video of a speech that I made at the European Parliament in Strasbourg about reparations and equity went viral, was put online and then shared on a neo-Nazi forum, and I was on the receiving end of horrific trolling and abuse. So my lived experience and also understanding the amount of work that needs to be done to support women of colour, particularly when it comes to online gender-based violence, is what spurred me on to start Glitch. I'm going to pause speaking for a moment and share my screen to show you an animation which should hopefully convey that this was a problem before the pandemic, but how the problem's even now worse thanks to lockdown measures across the world. Oh, sorry, hold on. I think I need to start it from the beginning. There you go. That's the end of the animation. I hope that was all clear to you all. We launched the Ripple Effect report last year because when we saw that there were lockdown measures happening across the world and the online usage was increasing, we immediately were worried that this would mean the increase of online abuse, and it did. And which is why, and it also confirmed the importance of looking at online abuse from an intersectional lens, because when you look at women, and then, yes, we can get a copy of the animation, it's on our website. When we look at women, that doesn't tell enough of a picture. We need to look at race, identity, gender identity, faith and religion, and disability as well. And so if we don't talk about intersectionality when we talk about gender-based violence, then we're never going to really make the online space safe, and we're not really talking about gender-based violence. So that's the first thing. I think also when we talk about online abuse and through an intersectional lens, that will also help us understand the issues of class, also the issues of language and nuances and looking at something that second generation tech companies like TikTok are doing, which is to localize content moderators so that that language and that nuance and specificities are being picked up properly. Because the worst thing you want is to have a harsh law, harsh content moderation, and that means there's a dampening on freedom of expression. Well, one thing I also want to say in the introductory bit, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about Glitch, is that when we talk about online abuse at Glitch, we talk about it as an umbrella term, because there are many different tactics and many different ways that online abuse spins out, and that's been talked about from previous speakers. But again, that intersectional lens and that framing really allows us to see that, because if we only look at online abuse of white middle-class women in politics, then we're going to not see how hate speech and Islamophobia and anti-Blackness affects Black women. We won't see how there is a growing issue around surveillance and password sharing amongst younger women, and also data privacy violations. We won't see how old generations are being susceptible to misinformation, which we've seen the harm of, how harmful that is when it comes to the pandemic. But there's also misinformation that disproportionately affects women and does affect women's chances when it comes to public office. There's great research from the National Democratic Institute and their Not the Cost campaign that show the impact of online abuse and misinformation on the electability of a woman, even if the rumor was completely a rumor. Intersectionality also allows us to see that the complexities around other intersectional identities. I mentioned before disability. When we've worked with groups from Epilepsy Society or from the deaf community, we've heard horrific stories around the way that they receive abuse is through gifs and videos. To cause one for the Epileptic Society, one case we heard was people on purpose and intentionally sending flashing GIF and videos to people that they knew had epilepsy to cause an epileptic attack on their way to work, on their way to pick up their kids from school. So that's the reason why when we talk about online abuse and when we talk about the different tactics, it's really, really important that we're looking at who else is not in the room to talk about their lived experience and making sure we have an intersectional lens. So that's why the work of what we do at Glitch is fast becoming in high demand, and why unfortunately I can't stay for long, because we've got a meeting with the Minister for the Constitution, because we had the green light in the UK for the elections to go ahead, and you can imagine there's been no conversation around online gender-based violence and all the online abuse that women in politics will face at the election in May. But at Glitch, we've got three key pillars to our work: awareness, advocacy, and action. I've spoken a lot about awareness and the impact of online abuse, but one thing I do want to note is that it's really important, and I've said before by previous speakers, that we talk about online abuse as a continuum of violence, and that we do not do a hierarchy of abuse. We don't call online abuse something that happens in the virtual world, and gender-based violence something that happens in the real world. One thing that we can do very quickly is change our language to make sure that it talks about the non-hierarchical form of violence, how they all interplay, and how they all suck, basically. Another key element of our work is advocacy. That's through government and tech companies. So we sometimes are fortunate, and sometimes it's tough. Members of the Twitter's Trust and Safety Council, and next week it will be announced of another tech company I can't say yet. This allows us to work on short-term reforms to be able to get the online space working better. We don't believe this is the only thing that we want. We want long-term systemic change, and that's why we're looking at regulation. And I'm super pleased that we have representation from the European Parliament here, and to talk about the Digital Services Act on a European level. But in the UK, we're talking about the Online Harms Bill. If we want tech companies to actually work for women, and as Spider Alex talked about in her presentation, then from the very inception of tech platform and design, it has to work for women. We have to see safety by design principles, gender by design principles, and put a duty of care on tech companies. So our advocacy work is looking at making sure that the Online Harms Bill in the UK And the Digital Services Act does take into account intersectionality and the different forms of online abuse. It's sad that the current proposals for the Digital Services Act and the online harms doesn't mention women enough and doesn't mention intersectionality enough. And I think it's a real shame, given the death and murder of George Floyd in June and a lot of conversations around Black Lives Matter, that there wasn't a reflection around intersectionality, but this is why Glitch exists. And then our last work is action, is our programmatic work. And I'm looking here also in the chat to see how I'm doing for time. Our programmatic work is to deal with the issue at hand. So we deliver digital self-care, self-defense, and digital citizenship training for free, and also bespoke for employers and for big charities as well. And the crux is of that is to get people really understanding what online safety is, what digital security is, in a very easy way to understand, in a very interactive way, in a way that doesn't at all victim blame. So the term that we love to use here is digital self-care and self-defense, because it's like, how can I best defend myself from the different forms of harm that can exist online? The way, sadly, we have to do that when it comes to the offline space. So women, we have to be careful not to jog at night. It's not fair, but we do. We have to be careful about not leaving our drinks unattended. It's the same way of conditioning ourselves to understand that the online space isn't as nice as the way we use the online space. And I think that's the biggest thing that we've been able to do here in the UK, in parts of Europe as well. We've delivered training parts of Europe, in North America, and also in Africa. We're actually going to be delivering our training workshop in the Maldives and Kyrgyzstan. And last year, before the pandemic, I was in Montenegro delivering the workshop. The impact of that is captured in our evaluation, where people feel confident about online abuse and how to report it. And also what we're trying to do is instill some form of digital citizenship in people, where they can understand how to properly intervene and support somebody who's facing online abuse. And we've been working with academics to suggest appropriate ways to be an active bystander, a kind of civic-minded person online. So we're not just ignoring the trolling and the abuse that happens, but we're all playing a part to make our online space safe. And I think that is something that we can learn from the amazing activists and our ancestors who have paved the way on gender-based violence with the offline world, and how we can take most of that learning to the online space. The final thing I want to leave you all here to think about is what a public health approach to tackling online abuse would look like. Because how does sending someone to prison for 6 months solve the issue of the internet? How does making somebody have a criminal offense and therefore unable to get a job and, you know, all the things, how does that help deal with the issue that we have with the online space? A public health or public education approach to online abuse for us would look at a holistic education, would look at tackling some of the reasons why people troll, which is poverty, isolation, and longing for community and self-esteem and well-being and mental health, as well as the lack of conversation and education around how to use the platforms properly. And if we all decide on a European level and, you know, join together with our amazing organizations to talk about a public health approach and a public education approach to online abuse, I feel like we'll be making a lot of long-term systematic change, which is super important, and I think in honor of what we've learned from Black Lives Matter last year. Thank you very much, and I'm here to take questions.
Muchísimas gracias, Segi, por tu intervención. Como os comentaba al inicio, ella tiene que irse y le vamos a hacer ahora las preguntas. Sí que muchas gracias porque ha aportado, ¿no?, elementos importantes y también elementos que tienen que ver con la experiencia de Glenn, ¿no?, del trabajo que están realizando. En ese sentido, podríamos aprovechar que una de las compañeras, ¿no?, antes ha hecho una pregunta y que creemos que también puede ser útil para que usted pueda compartir, ¿no? Desde Bosnia y Herzegovina, ¿no?, están trabajando con personas migradas, ¿no?, y en particular con familias jóvenes, mujeres y mujeres jóvenes, y también niñas, ¿no? Y disculpar que se ha ido la pregunta. Perdonad. Y la compañera explicaba que están trabajando con mujeres migradas, ¿no? Y con familias y jóvenes, y les gustaría que usted, desde su experiencia, cómo pueden protegerlas, ¿no? Respecto al tema de ciberviolencias, o sea, específicamente, si tiene alguna recomendación en ese sentido. Gracias. Si quieres, puedes contestar y luego te hago más preguntas. Gracias.
I think helping refugee, asylum seeker and migrant communities is super important, and actually is a lot more complex because you've also got the narrative and the misinformation coming from mainstream media. You have it coming from news articles, journalists scapegoating migrants and women and demonizing them and stereotyping them. So there's a challenge to kind of tackle fake news, fact check, where there's the kind of tropes that are being used to blame them, to do that with the media, to do that online, and as well as for them to kind of feel safe. I think one basic thing I'd love to see more from people providing support to minoritized communities is giving them a bit of a risk assessment template, because lived experience and storytelling is super important to our movement and our work, right? It's healing, and it's bonding, and it's uniting, and it's freeing. But at the same time, we sometimes need to give a better parameter in which people are expressing themselves and the potential backlash. I think a lot of media training could be provided to women of minoritized communities who might be speaking out, who might be doing activism, who might be doing media work, or might be having an online presence, to really think about, one, do they want to put their full name there and their government name, because that could put them at risk? Do they want to have a pseudonym or a cartoon that kind of has their face but not really their face? And just helping them have agency over their story, and that they're not re-traumatized. I think a lot of people, meanwhile, when they want to tackle gender-based violence from an intersectional lens, they end up doing a lot of trauma to minoritized communities.
Bueno,
I can answer the second question if that's helpful. I see it come through.
Sí, la estás, efectivamente.
Well, how do I see it interacting? I don't, unfortunately, because on the same day that the Online Harms Bill was announced, so was the Digital Service Act and the digital, and there's also at the same time of a consultation on the Online Harms Bill, there's been conversations around the digital market. And this is all with the backdrop of MPs not understanding the area as well. So there's a lot of capacity building that we're having to do, a lot of briefings, a lot of kind of conversations and education to get them to understand the situation, to be able to properly hold tech companies to account. For those that don't know, the Online Harms White Paper is suggesting that Ofcom, who currently regulates our media outlets, will now regulate social media companies, and there's pros and cons of that. My concern is that the definition of harms and accountability will be too narrow in scope and therefore not enough, although the government is right that the definition will then be too broad and then therefore not give enough to Ofcom to do in terms of regulation. Nevertheless, if you can remember one thing from me today, is obviously the public education and public health approach to online abuse, but it's the fact that 2021 needs to be the year of tech accountability. We've seen legislation being proposed in Germany, conversations in France. We saw what happened when Australia even dared to talk about some form of regulation. Whether you agreed with it or not, the idea that because we've decided to regulate tech companies the way we regulate alcohol, banking and finance, the law and pharmacy and medicine, the audacity for a state nation to help hold another for-profit company to account meant that they basically provided a very nuclear response to to that and shut down Facebook. And I think the year of tech accountability is now. What we saw in Capitol Hill in January, conversations at the G7 summit later this year, all have to be around tech accountability and making sure that there is intel being shared cross community, cross countries. We see that happen for children. We see that happen for around sexual exploitation. And I think that is also on the rise due to online abuse and online harms. We need to see that same intel sharing when it comes to other forms of harm and centered gender-based violence in that regulation.
Muchísimas gracias, Eyi, por la respuesta y también gracias porque sabemos que tienes que marchar. Gracias por compartir tu experiencia y la experiencia tan valiosa de tu organización. Vamos a seguir con Yelena de la organización Antina. Ella es una activista por los derechos de las mujeres y ha dedicado su trabajo a brindar apoyo directo y asistencia a lo largo de tiempo a mujeres, niñas y niños, víctimas de personas también, víctimas de la trata de personas y de la violencia de género. Ella es la responsable del programa en Antina, que es una organización con sede en Belgrado que trabaja para brindar mecanismos de apoyo sostenible para grupos especialmente vulnerables y sobre todo en especial a víctimas de la trata de personas. Y va a explicarnos una experiencia en la que se entrecruza, ¿no?, una investigación que pensamos que era muy relevante, sobre todo para las activistas, y es que es un tema que normalmente no se hace presente. Gracias por tu participación y sobre todo pues lo que decíamos, ¿no?, de las claves del informe que se llama Detrás de las pantallas, ciberviolencias y tráfico de personas, donde se discutirán las formas en que las organizaciones de derechos de las mujeres y los grupos de mujeres migrantes pueden abordar también reformas políticas y laborales. Elena, puedes comenzar tu turno. Gracias.
Thank you, my dear colleague Monse. If I may add to this part of my biography, and I have the most difficult job ever to speak last at this session, and after these so many great women and activists, and to say something, you know, like meaningful and smart, it's really quite a job. But I will try to be really short and to explain the position. As you know, I'm coming from Serbia, a country that's not a member of the EU. So our position is a bit different in regards to the name of this session, and it's concerning the online gender-based violence through EU laws. So our position as Athena, as an NGO, and as Serbia is that we are now in a quite difficult situation because we are in negotiations for many years to enter EU. So we think it's this question of digital violence is also connected in a larger extent to that, because we need really not to waste no more time. As maybe you are aware or not, the negotiations they're not formally stopped, but there are some intentions to be so. So we are very eager to see, will EU, you know, like at some point not give up on us, or that we will not give up on this negotiation, because it's really important. The question of violence against women, the question of migration, which is a concern to Serbia a lot, because as you know, we have still a huge number of people coming to Serbia for many reasons. Also, it's a political issue, it's an economic issue, it's a geographical issue before entering the EU countries. So for Serbia, it's very important to be a part of these kind of debates, even if we are even if we are not the members of EU. It's also important because these two chapters, 23 and 24, which are connected to the justice, freedom, security, and all the questions that are tackling these questions that we are talking about today. So as we are all now still in COVID pandemic situation, there are many, I would say maybe like weird things that happen. For example, if you watch like official statistics, you can see in our country that officially the government is reporting that the numbers of cases of violence decreased because of many reasons. So NGOs, of course, had the intention to go deeper into details why that is happening, maybe because, of course, of the pandemic and the closure down and institutions having, you know, like all kinds of health interventions and other issues in mind. But as we gathered in Athena and working for so many years with victims of human trafficking, we would say that they were not sure that they will receive support. And this is what was stated also on many occasions. So we have to have that in mind. But also, you know, living in the country which is not a rich country, if I may just say it like that, there is a huge digital gap. So there were some thoughts about, you know, how the online violence will affect Serbia in this particular period of time in Corona. So we in Athena had an intention to interview women who are part of our program. And as you will see, that the name is behind the screens. You can find it on our website. I will share it later on. The number of women that participated, it's like huge, because it's like 1/3 of the victims, the official number of victims that were identified in Serbia in the last several years, in the last 5 years. So it's representative, the sample is representative. I would say that this kind of research wasn't, I'm following the subject, wasn't done in this particular way. So I would say that it's very important to have that in mind. So our first intention was that we point out to government that they have to be aware of the situation, what is going on online, that they have to include the online digital violence in the policies, that they have to make all kinds of resources available for the police and investigations when it comes to the human cyber trafficking and human trafficking, cyber crimes. So we started with saying that virtual is not less real, and therefore it's not less important. And that is maybe one of the lessons that and recommendations that I would like to share today, because somehow in this COVID pandemic everything is mixed, and then people we are like losing reality and what's going on around us. So we also wanted to share this information with the public in Serbia in order to know what's going on. It's not easy to interview victims of human trafficking that survived sexual violence, sexual exploitation, all kinds of gender-based violence. It needed a lot of efforts from our team, but we succeeded. If you are eager to see, you can see how we did it, because to ask a question to a victim of gender-based violence regarding the violence, you need to be really sensitized and to have a really specific approach. So what we found out from the women that suffered violence, that the perpetrators were unknown to them, but in 40%, but in 20% that they were partners or some people from the, call it, wider social groups. But also we found out that from helping professionals like police officers, they can be also the perpetrators. And this is also one message that I would like to send today, not to be, you know, like so narrow when thinking about who can be a perpetrator. Also, we learned that content of online threats received by the victims of human trafficking, that there are a lot of intimidations, mostly to redraw their testimony, and it's huge. The numbers are like around 60%. To change the statement of criminal proceedings. So that was a clear message to our prosecution and other legal bodies and entities to find a way how to track that and how to punish those who are doing that. Also, some of them said that they were threatened by certain people, that content with elements of pornography in which they are involved will be shared with people that they know or that they don't know. This is something also which was important to us. I'm not sure, have you followed this last story with the Pornhub, but as we saw from what happened from Visa and MasterCard is that they said that they will redraw all the payments to the Pornhub if Pornhub does not have exact policies in how they are reacting to certain videos that are involving minors. So this is something that is really important to know, that there are some responses that we can do. We as an NGO, we say, okay, it's good for the Pornhub that they deleted so many videos, but the harm was already done. So we have to now maybe try to find out how we can in future resolve some issues, and how we will try to find some solutions that this does not happen. In Serbia, we already had cases of this, we call it cyber dances. It's like rooms in which mostly minors have been raped and sexually exploited. We also have some, we have a verdict based on that, on several, I think 15 years of imprisonment for the person who did that. So we also pointed out to the institutions to dig more and to try to find out what's going on in this area of cyber trafficking as a new form, let's call it like that, a new form of a violence that's ongoing. So you will see also for the recruitment and exploitation, you can see in here that the numbers are also large, how many girls are recruited via internet and how many of them later on were exploited via internet. So because we don't have so much time now, I will try to just give you maybe these lessons learned. I put in here something like fear of use of information and communication technology. You know, like we are discussing invisible people, invisible women, you know, like migrants are in Serbia, they're invisible. They don't live with us, they live behind us, you know. Like yesterday, one of our politicians said that Serbia will not be a parking lot for migrants in here. So this means that we are not counting them as persons, as humans. So also what's one of the lessons learned from this research that we made is that we made these women that were previously invisible, we made them be more invisible until maybe rest of their lives. You know, they don't want to go online, they don't want to be photographed, they are changing their identities. So is it a life that we are, you know, coping to have in future? So this is also a question. Some of the lessons learned from the point from, I'm just saying for Serbia, and I'm just saying for victims of human trafficking, is that what is illegal offline should be illegal online. We have to cherish that as a norm, because otherwise in these kind of exploitation, we will have a huge and major problems. We also learned, for example, that in our neighboring EU country, Romania, they found there is one court decision on impersonation as a criminal act. So we know that there are some things that could be done in regards to this. Also, internet companies have to take more responsibilities, and I think that governments can for sure do it. We were mentioning the new laws. Also, yeah, new laws, but as it was really beautifully said, our constitution, Istanbul Convention, already is providing certain answers, so why not use it, you know, like already, just we are calling it with a different name. And we live in a such a, I don't know how to define it, but corrosive space, and so many hate speech, it's all connected. So I started this, you didn't saw it, I started this presentation with one of my favorite quotes of Audre Lorde, that there is no such a thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't live a single issue lives. So what I wanted to say is that we have to acknowledge the existence of what we have now. We have to hurry up. I'm saying that for Serbia, we are really hoping that EU will not give up on us still, and that we will have some chance to help these women that are suffering violence, unfortunately, in Serbia, but also all around the world. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias por la experiencia y sobre todo por poner el foco en una violencia entrecruzada que muchas veces es tan invisible o que se ha invisibilizado tantísimo, ¿no? Si os parece, han habido pocas preguntas. Entiendo que me puedo permitir el lujo también otra vez de volveros a dar la palabra a cada una de vosotras y utilizarla, si queréis, como 2 minutos cada una de vosotras, como para poder hablar de los retos, si queréis, o lo que creáis oportuno, y intentar respetar el tiempo para que todas podáis hablar. Si quieres, Spiverax, ¿comienzas tú? ¿Te parece?
Sí, si no se me cae la electricidad de nuevo, estoy así con conexión precaria. Sí, I think that it was very interesting to see the different approaches, and I think like Yelena, the work that Tatina is doing and the kind of study you have been conducted is so precious, it's so needed, and it's so difficult to do. So I totally agree that there's a need to I don't know, share more about methodologies that enable us to produce this data and to be able to make some comparison and longitudinality. Meanwhile, public institutions doesn't take a chance to do it. They should be doing it, but we are doing it. And the problem is generally we can only do snapshots. So it would be nice to see how we can support each other to create a bulk of observatory, like a European observatory of gender-based violence that would stem from the different studies that are developed by grassroots activists and civil society organizations. That would be a nice one. And I will pass my turn to other persons. Thanks.
Muchas gracias también por ser concisa y también por volver a poner el foco en la necesidad de alianzas y de estrategias colectivas y comunes, ¿no? que es un poco lo que también estamos haciendo en este webinar. Laia, si quieres compartir tu experiencia o tus breves reflexiones finales.
Gracias. Yo voy a aprovechar este par de minutos para dar las gracias a todo el trabajo colectivo que estáis compartiendo y lanzar un par de últimas reflexiones, porque mientras estamos hablando de este vacío o esta precariedad de marco regulatorio y esta ausencia de estudios, ¿no?, públicos, surgen otras iniciativas que están ocupando el espacio. Por ejemplo, una de las diferencias que va a marcar los derechos de las mujeres en Europa es que están saliendo iniciativas privadas mediante precio para eliminar contenidos de la red. Y esto va a hacer que solo algunas mujeres puedan acceder a tener su reputación, su identidad, su bienestar protegida en línea. Y tenemos que reflexionar, ¿no?, sobre este marco. Y para terminar, así como en nuevas infraestructuras, ¿no?, vuelvo a poner el ejemplo de la inteligencia artificial, se está ya comentando en este proceso regulatorio nuevo el hecho de la seguridad por diseño, security by design. Las plataformas intermediarias de Internet tienen posibilidades económicas y técnicas de incrementar mucho las prestaciones de seguridad. Es decir, incrementar estas prestaciones en su responsabilidad corporativa e incrementar el empoderamiento en conocimiento de la cultura de seguridad digital de las mujeres es una prioridad, mientras los marcos regulatorios no puedan ofrecer estas respuestas adecuadas. Y la última mención, porque sí que he dicho que tendría solo un minuto. Creo que una de las problemáticas que tenemos es que no compartimos espacios. Las activistas desarrollan sus conocimientos, sus experiencias en un lado, las experiencias regulatorias en otras, institucionales, el ámbito educativo, sanitario, y no encontramos espacios. Lo digo porque, por ejemplo, más allá de la violencia de género, en otros espacios, como es el de la protección contra el maltrato y la tortura, estamos ya trabajando también en la cibertortura y, por lo tanto, muchas experiencias que si se pudieran conectar de alguna manera darían muchos frutos. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Laia, también por ofrecernos ese reto importante de poder compartir espacios. Este webinar era uno de sus objetivos, ¿no? El compartir y ver luego después, posteriormente, cómo vamos a poder sostener, pues a lo mejor este inicio, ¿no? de una larga trayectoria. Y Elena, si quieres apuntar algún elemento más, tienes tu tiempo también. Gracias.
I would give a floor to my colleagues if they have certain more things to add, because I think I said enough for today. Maybe I'm the only one who do not have a wish to speak. I'm just joking. It's just, I think I sent already the message, and I would maybe underline what my colleague also said about the accountability. So it's like a concern of us all, and for sure, I think that we should keep in mind that online sphere was actually designed not to produce any inequalities, but then at the end it just produced many inequalities in many different ways that we mentioned today. So because everything somehow I don't know how to those inequalities provide like space. The internet is providing space for everyone to erase these imbalances that are starting from the fact that we can control our content, so that we can do something really directly. So that would be just my message, that what created inequality and hostility is people themselves. So we have to to do everything what is in our power to somehow control the situation as much as it is possible.
Muchísimas gracias. Efectivamente, sí tenías cosas como para seguir proponiendo. El tener la posibilidad de compartir y de tener un espacio en el que todas podamos hablar de las buenas prácticas, pero también como de tejer nuevas alianzas, para nosotros era muy importante. Simplemente volver a daros las gracias por estar aquí, a las panelistas y a las compañeras y compañeros y compañeres que han estado presentes en el webinar. Tenemos retos, los hemos puesto en evidencia. Vamos a hacer un informe que White Plus hará llegar a través de sus redes y a través de sus contactos a todos los lugares, incluidos también el trabajo que está realizando en la Unión Europea. Pensamos que este trabajo colectivo que hemos realizado también conjuntamente con mi organización, con Creación Positiva, puede dar frutos y vamos a seguir caminando todas juntas para visibilizar las violencias digitales, ¿no? con carácter desde una lógica feminista, para poder realmente transformar de forma sostenible esas desigualdades y esas discriminaciones que son las generadoras, ¿no? Y como nosotras comentamos siempre, ¿no? Para poder abolir el sistema desigual que es el sistema patriarcal, en el que se entrecruza, ¿no? con el sistema capitalista y el sistema colonialista tan violento que nos conduce, ¿no? Va a estar grabado, va a estar accesible y sobre todo va a estar abierto a la posibilidad de seguir trabajando de forma colectiva. Muchísimas gracias y seguimos en las redes, seguimos en las calles y seguimos trabajando juntas. Gracias y un saludo a todas. Bye.
Thank you, Monse and Laura. I'll be in touch with you very soon. And have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.